people that consume a lot of seaweed, the countries that consume a lot of seaweed would be Japan, South Korea, and these are countries with the highest life expectancy. So all of this kind of comes together.
Welcome to this episode of Growth Island. Today we're going to talk about aging and how to age well. What is some of the cutting research actually saying? And for that, I got the co-director of the Rochester Aging Research Center, Vera Gorbunova. She is a very quick at writing, you would say. She's published a lot of papers, so she's not been on the slow side in the academia. So she knows a lot about both how to do proper research, but also some pretty cool results about what we're seeing about how to age well. So Vera, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks for the invitation.
Vera, tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got into all of this research.
So I've been in this field for a very long time, over 20 years. I became interested in aging research very early on when I was still in college. A biology student, I was thinking about what area of biology would be most fascinating. And everything seemed fascinating, but aging in particular really caught my attention because it's both a very important fundamental science problem, and it touches everyone. Everybody ages, almost every living thing ages. So it affects also the society in a major way. And I thought that this would be really exciting problem to tackle, both as a scientist and also for the benefit of the people.
It's a fantastic subject, and it's something that's gaining a lot more attention these days, and also a lot more venture capital. This Atlas, which has like some of the most wealthy people in the world, where academics are joining there to kind of do the research. What do we understand about aging today?
Well, we understand more and more. So the knowledge has really expanded exponentially, I would say, within the past 15 years or so. When I just was joining the field early in my career, we knew very little. And then people started studying aging, first using very short-lived organisms like fruit flies or worms, found certain genes that can affect aging, that can make these short-lived organisms live longer. So that was first the beginning of understanding that there is a genetic component of aging, and we can actually change the rate of aging. So it's not something that's completely inevitable. We can manipulate it. And then, of course, in more recent years, the attention shifted from the very short-lived model organisms to humans and to also other long-lived organisms. And this is one of the important topics of my research, to understand very long-lived organisms, because they have those mechanisms that we can borrow from them. And we find more and more of such examples. And then I think we're coming very close to developing interventions to slow the rate of aging.
What are some, I've heard that we've been able to increase the lifespan of mice, worms, and flies or mosquitoes. What are some of the results that you've seen? There's something like, is it 2x mice, 5x mosquitoes, which should definitely be illegal when you've done the truth.
It's mostly fruit flies. So yeah, fruit people
flies.
Don't work with mosquitoes. Mostly people work with mosquitoes to find ways to kill them.
Yeah. And then a worm, something like 10x. Like, what are some of the results have you seen that were kind of like astonishing or like surprising or interesting?
Well, you are very accurate, right, in this assessment. Indeed, it is much easier to extend lifespan of those simple organisms. There are many different interventions that can extend lifespan of the worm. And then as you go, from worms and flies to mice, it gets more difficult. So probably the more complex mammalian organisms are more difficult to manipulate. And only very few interventions that work in the worm will also work in the mouse. And of course, now thinking, okay, what about human? So maybe, not everything that works in the mouse will work in human. And that's the reason why we are focusing on organisms mammals that are long-lived, like whales or naked mole rats or bats, other long-lived animals. Because if we find something that mechanistically, from molecular point of view, they're doing something different, so then the likelihood that this will translate well into humans is actually much higher.
Got it. What are some of the things that we can see now that we can actually do to make sure we live longer and healthier life? Because it's not about just living long life, it's very much about living a life that's worth living as well.
Right, that's true. Nobody wants to live a long life but being disabled and frail. So when we are talking about life extension, of course we mean healthy life and health span. That's important because some people are sort of skeptical. Do we want to extend lifespan because there will be many frail people? But this is really not the case. If you look at centenarians, so these are people that live 100 and beyond, most of them are extremely healthy. So they actually compress this period of morbidity and disability to the very end of their life. So if they live 100 years, but they're staying active for, maybe 90, 95 of those years. So these two things really go together. You extend lifespan and you improve health as well. So now to your question, what can we do, right? So human centenarians, they are very lucky individuals and they may have some, perhaps, genetic makeup that helps them do it. But what about an average person?
What can you and I do?
Right, exactly. So there are certain things that we learned. Many of them are lifestyle modifications, which are fairly easy to implement, and they're very safe. Of course, there are now also some pharmaceutical strategies, and not all of them are very well sort of verified and controlled, but some of them are safer than others, so people try it anyway. So in terms of lifestyle modifications, these are maybe obvious things, but they're still true. So moderate exercise is good, and I'm not talking about like Olympic sports. No, it has to be moderate, right? You don't want to put too much strain on your body, but at the same time, being sedentary is not what we evolved to be. Humans been always moving.
So how do we figure out what's moderate, like the good amount of exercise? So I have some of the listeners that are very active, and then I have some that's going to use this as an excuse to say like, oh, but Vera said don't exercise too much. So what would you recommend? Like, what's a good amount?
Well, of course, it's also very, very personal, because some people, they're very fit and they can exercise a lot without feeling any negative effects. And of course, you kind of adjust it also as you get older. But I would say on average, moderate exercise, maybe running or walking, like 1 hour per day is okay, but without, extreme exhaustion or extreme strain on your joints, because that's also part of the anatomy that wears out fairly quickly. And this is what, many professional athletes actually suffer from, joint problems later in life. Like there is low impact exercise, such as, swimming is always very good. Walking, for some people running is fine, but for other people running may be already putting too much strain on the joints.
Fair. That sounds similar to Mark Sisson as well. Mark Sisson is the guy behind Primal Health, and he talks about do like low intensity movement every single day. Like ideally, I think he talks about an hour or more, but not high intensity. And then like 3 times a week, he suggests some kind of sprinting. So like 3 sets of between 15 to 60 seconds is all. And then lifting heavy things, I think 2 to 3 times a week. And the rest should just kind of be play, but some kind of movement. So we're not just sitting.
Right. Yeah, this is very, very good advice, right? So there's just the walking, and then also the, exercising the muscles with the lifting. So just a good combination. But in moderation, I would say. So this is in terms of staying active. Diet is very important, obviously. So not overeating. This has been, really the problem of modern society, that people eat too much, and people eat too much of, very calorie-rich foods that our bodies didn't really learn to handle. So in animals,
in regards to eating, I heard a lot about fasting and calorie restriction. And I know some of the research, a lot of it is in, I think it's in mice and so on, but we're also getting more research when it comes to fasting in humans and calorie restriction. Is that something that you've looked at or seen any of the science behind?
Yes. So we didn't directly study calorie restriction in humans, but of course I've been talking to many colleagues and reading literature. So this is a very fascinating field. In model organisms, mice, flies, calorie restriction generally is very powerful at extending lifespan. Whether it will have exactly the same effect in humans is still questionable, because mice and flies and worms, they are very fast-living creatures. So for them, slowing down a little bit is already beneficial. But humans are not as fast-living. It takes really a long time for us to mature, and we live for a long time. So the effect may be not as dramatic as in mice. In mice, you can extend lifespan like 30%, 40% with calorie restriction. It is unlikely that in humans, like, we would live to 150. But there are definite health benefits of that. Just not overeating. Whether calorie restriction in itself will be as powerful in the mouse as in the mouse, we still don't know. So there are studies in humans, but they're mostly short term. And there is still a debate whether it's benefit of real calorie restriction or just benefit of not overeating. But overall, it's a good thing. It's very difficult for an average person to sustain calorie restriction of, like significant calorie restriction, like what is applied to animals, 20-30%. It's just very difficult. It's not fun, actually. So for humans, a much more practical approach would be intermittent fasting, where, for example, there is one day a week where you either don't eat or just eat very little. Or maybe even for some people, even that is unpleasant and unsustainable. So then maybe skipping a meal, for example, you skip lunch. So you feel a little bit of hunger. And that may be a good thing, because the science tells us that this is what helps actually promote longevity and upregulate those defensive genes in model organisms, that there is this signal, well, there is some scarcity of resources, but upregulate your maintenance, and then you can survive a little bit longer until conditions are good for reproduction. So that's like for the worm, this is how it works. So for humans, perhaps we can use similar logic. So, okay, you skip lunch and you feel a little bit hungry by dinner time, and that may be giving some benefits. And then at the same time, it doesn't make your life very sad by continuously being hungry.
That makes sense. I do intermittent fasting. I've been doing for a while, but basically just where I eat dinner, ideally early, and then I skip breakfast. And the first 3 weeks, it was very hard for me to adjust to, because I've always been eating breakfast. So for me, I was like always breakfast. And then I felt kind of like dizzy in the start. I used this app to time it and so on. But I read and heard this like a 3 weeks adjustment period. And once you adjust to it, it's much easier. And today I only fast the days when it feels right. So if I feel like my body is craving some food in the morning, I eat some food in the morning. And then probably like 4 to 6 days a week, I have those 16, 18 hours of a window where I don't eat. But now it's much easier.
Yeah, that is very important point also about the timing, because there is this view that the time of the meal is very important. It's important to have this period when we are not eating. And that would, most logically be the nighttime. So if, let's say, you ate dinner not too late, and then you either skip breakfast or eat it relatively late, so then you actually have this window of, when the organism can kind of adjust to the lack of food, and that's already beneficial. So in animal studies, just time restricting feeding was sometimes giving the same benefit as a full-blown calorie restriction. And another important point here is that, again, sort of moving a little bit away from diet, but more in like how it's administered, keeping proper sleep patterns is very important. Because when people, for example, eat very late or wake up at night and go to the fridge to eat something, so that really disrupts circadian rhythms. And what our research and research of other groups has shown that circadian regulation is extremely important for longevity. We have a paper that's right now in press in Cell Metabolism, so it will be available fairly soon, where we show that in long-lived species, different metabolic genes are sort of expressed at slightly lower level, and they are controlled by circadian genes. So they are under the circadian control. And then what it means for humans is that if you disrupt circadian control, if you go and eat in the middle of the night, for example, or you don't sleep, you keep working. So those metabolic genes that are negatively associated with lifespan will be expressed more continuously. So it will have a negative effect on lifespan. So this is why it's really important to keep nighttime, free from food, and preferably, keep the lights down. So because when you have artificial lights at night, so that's really the best way to disrupt your circadian clocks.
So staying away from blue light in the evening is one of the main advices, not sitting with our phone. Is that correct?
Well, blue light or maybe any light. I think the research is still, there are very different schools of, what kind of light, but I would say any light. Just limit your light exposure. If you must do something late, so then really dim your lights as much as possible, so that you don't disrupt your circadian rhythm. The best is just go to sleep and have this period of uninterrupted sleep. So this is, one other suggestion. Now, in terms of what to eat, right? So there are so many different ideas here. I would say one fairly, pleasant strategy is to eat different plant foods. So Mediterranean diet, and probably people know what that is. So that's diet that's rich in fruits, vegetables, fairly low amount of grains, some fish and, maybe chicken, but very low red meat. So really sort of staying away from grains, dairy, used to be considered, dairy is so important. And of course, especially, in the north where there are not many fruits and vegetables, that's how people survived through centuries. But right now we have access to other sources of food. So I think minimizing dairy actually is quite beneficial. And eating a lot of, berries and all these, I would say like colored vegetables and fruits, and because when we are performing different screens for compounds that extend lifespan in model organisms or activate certain pro-longevity enzymes, very often we find flavonoids or all of these molecules that, for example, give color to blueberries or raspberries or different, other berries like that. So they have these pro-longevity effects, and it is often difficult to isolate this particular compound and say, this alone will give all the benefits. It's more like the complex of all of these molecules together. that is beneficial. So I can recommend people eating blueberries. It will not hurt anyone, and strawberries and cabbage. Also has many pro-longevity compounds, and other brassica-related vegetables. So this is, and then I can also recommend something that came from our research more specifically. So we are studying this sirtuins, and the particular sirtuin 6, which is a very important longevity gene. And we were looking for molecules that activate it. And we found, and actually it was found even before us, but people were looking at activators of deacetylation activity of sirtuins, and they found different compounds. And then we found that sirtuin 6 has another activity called mono-ADP ribosylation. So we tested which activator molecules activate that activity as well, because we find that that activity is maybe even more important for human longevity. And we found the seaweed. And the compound in seaweed is called fucoidan, which is a short sugar polysaccharide, a very potent activator of sirtuin 6. It is found in brown seaweed, and people that consume a lot of seaweed, the countries that consume a lot of seaweed would be Japan, South Korea, and these are countries with the highest life expectancy. So all of this kind of comes together.
So jumping into that, Vera, I am in Mexico right now, Playa del Carmen. There's so much seaweed at the beach. Should I just go take a bite down there, or how is it with seaweed? I heard it's a little bit more complex than that.
Yes, so there is a lot, there are many different species of seaweed. I think in general, seaweed is good for you it has many different nutrients that people have been using. So probably any seaweed has some benefits. But in terms of activating sirtuin 6, this compound is found in certain species of brown seaweed. And we in the laboratory tested different batches of seaweed, because if you just buy seaweed, it would be from different oceans and different locations, so they are not all the same. If you take 10 batches, maybe 3 of them will have a strong activating activity. So we tested in the laboratory. We find that some of the batches have stronger activation. So we don't yet know exactly what determines it. Maybe really conditions under which this seaweed was growing, how much sunlight it was getting.
So how do we find that seaweed? Or do we need to wait for more research to be found, and then it's going to be cultivated in more places?
So fucoidan in general, it's possible to buy it as a supplement. But of course, in that case, you still don't know if that will be a good activator or not. So we collaborate with the supplement pro-longevity company, Do Not Age, and we test for them batches of seaweed. So you can buy from them SIRT6 activator that we tested. We don't test like it every day, but they send us a sample from every new lot that they get, and we test it, activate SIRT6. Okay. So in this case, you can get a product that's been verified.
And what does it actually go and do in the body? What's the process apart from that is good for anti-aging?
It is a polysaccharide, so it's food. It's very safe. We know that it activates sirtuin 6, and sirtuin 6 is an enzyme that is in the nucleus of every cell, and it is responsible for maintaining our DNA packaged in the right way. And when we get older, sirtuin 6 may not be enough of it to maintain our DNA in good shape. And by maintaining good shape, I mean that it's not only it helps repair mutations, or damage, but also it just helps keeping it organized, because you can imagine DNA is a very long molecule, right? And this is like if you have this thread and it gets all tangled together. So it needs to be very well organized. And as we get older, like every cycle of cell division, DNA gets unraveled and packaged back together, or every time a gene is transcribed, again, needs to be opened and put together. So it gets messed up. It's almost like, if you fold laundry in your sock drawer, like when we are young, it's all very nice and organized, but over time you go in and out, pull things, and then it becomes a mess. So what sirtuin-6 can do, it can go back and just organize things back together. So what seaweed can help here is that it just provides a boost to SIRT6, it activates it, and it can be, a little bit more efficient in doing its job, where it needs this help as we get older, because there is more more laundry to fold at that point.
Makes sense. What are some other things that is fascinating right now in regards to the aging well that you think is promising, but that might not have met or hit the mainstream news?
Well, there are so many developments right now, and it really, some of them are closer to being really implemented in people, and some further away. For example, very exciting direction was so-called partial reprogramming, or Yamanaka factors. Shinya Yamanaka received Nobel Prize several years ago, where he showed that by expressing these factors, you can take like a cell, for example, skin cell, and convert it into embryonic cell. So that very powerful. And then other researchers expressed the same factors in the mouse, just a very short period of time, and then mouse got younger. So it's similar to what I was telling you about, folding laundry. So here, these factors, they also kind of refolded everything, made the cell younger. So this is very exciting, but at the same time, I think it still has a long way to go before being used in people, because it's dangerous. Because what these reprogramming factors can do, they can really change the fate of the cell. And then, okay, it's good if it just becomes young, healthy cell, but what if it refolds and becomes a cancerous cell? So there is this danger. But, if we can really make it safe at some point, so that would be really a way of not just slowing down aging, but reversing age.
That would be fascinating. We are very curious about how is it day to day for someone like you doing research on anti-aging? How does that look like?
Oh, well, it's very exciting job to do. Every day, I get up and usually I talk to my students and postdocs. They show the results of the experiments. We discuss them. And things don't, in science, there is a lot of hard work where often you think, okay, I make this experiment and I expect certain result. And then you do the experiment and you get the result. What is this? I don't understand what's going on. And often, it's important not to throw things out the window, but actually think, because maybe there is something really new that you never thought about. Maybe it's actually even better than the results you wanted to get. Maybe it opens up some new directions. And we had many cases of that. And then if you really find something new and then you start doing more experiments to probe it, and that's kind of a process of discovery. It never really works as planned, because we humans can think about, how things should work, but when you do experiments, it's very often it's completely different. But still, if you don't ignore those unexpected findings, so then you come to something really exciting. One example would be when we started working with naked mole rat. Naked mole-rat is a rodent that lives 40 years, tiny rodent. So we were trying to understand the secrets of longevity of naked mole-rats, and also they almost never get cancer. So we didn't even know, okay, how do we figure out why? So we took biopsies from naked mole-rats, started growing cells and just watching them, hoping maybe we see something useful. And then we noticed that these cells secrete something gooey in the media. So the culture media was becoming gooey, and people were annoyed by that because it clogs your pipette. But then we decided, well, we shouldn't ignore it. Let's figure out what the goo is. And it turned out the goo was hyaluronic acid. So this is a molecule that, many people are familiar with. So in different cosmetics, it's also used in medicine. And apparently naked mole-rats make a ton of it. And it's important for their longevity. So that actually led us to figuring out this longevity mechanism for the naked mole-rat that we didn't ignore.
Fascinating. Vera, what's one of the main misconceptions in the anti-aging field where you're like, oh no, did they just say that again? And now they totally took this research and screwed it around. What are some of the main misconceptions in the industry?
Well, I don't think there are main misconceptions. People, scientific knowledge accumulates. Like often you believe something is true, but then you understand it better, and the opinion can change. So it's constantly evolving. So I wouldn't say there is like one thing that's totally wrong. No, there are some things we don't know. Yeah.
Fair. What do you think about the people that say that we're going to be lived to 150 or 180 years?
I think it's possible. I don't know exactly when this will happen. I'm hoping that, maybe fairly soon. So the maximum lifespan of human beings has been constant for a very long time. So it's 120 years, plus minus. And even in the Bible, there is this verse that, human lifespan was limited to 120 years, so which tells us that like for a couple thousand years, it hasn't changed. Median lifespan changed a lot with better sanitation, safer environment. So people used to live like, maybe 30, 40 years. Now almost everyone lives 70 and 80s. But, I think what will happen eventually that like everyone could probably live to 120 because this is sort of hard limit for human maximum lifespan. And then your question, can we live beyond 120? I think that just by sanitation, we probably won't get there. But if we find, by doing research, if we find strategies to actually change the rate of aging or achieve this rejuvenation by, SIRT6 or Yamanaka factors, so then I think we can bypass this limit.
That'll be fascinating. I hope to be part of that generation that get so many wonderful healthy years. Vera, you made it pretty far career-wise, and a lot of people have been in academia and so on. What do you think is the difference since you got as far as you are with your career now and being so high up in the academic world?
The difference
between you and some of the other people that might have had the same desires but didn't get that far?
Oh, well, it's difficult to say. No, it's just there is some element of luck, right? You make certain discoveries. You don't ignore those unexpected findings. And, hard work. Just trying, that there is, of course, a very big limitation is funding. Right? Biological research is expensive. So it's not enough to just sit at home and, you have great ideas, you just do it on the computer. Although, nowadays there is a lot of data that accumulated. So even people that are just doing computational work can also, get very far. But still, in biology, you need experiment. And experiment is very expensive. So there is always this, very important task of raising funds for research, and that's what moves you forward.
Well, I always ask the guests before we end, what are 3 recommendations you would give for how to live a happy, healthy, and meaningful life?
I think happy, healthy, meaningful. It's very important to, do things you love and you find meaningful, because if your day is occupied with things you consider unimportant and don't enjoy, then it's not a very happy life. So just trying to do things that you love and that you believe are important. Staying healthy. We talked a lot about different strategies for doing that, and I think finally, probably the third, for human beings, it's very important, social interaction. So being surrounded by loved ones, people who care about you. So that's extremely important.
Thank you. Well, it's interesting that I've interviewed like top scientists like yourself. I've interviewed top athletes and people at the top of their career, and many people come with similar advice. Social connections, find meaning in life, don't be too hard on yourself, get sleep, movement, and get proper food. Those are some of the most common ones that come. So there must be something about it, since that many people from different walks of life are recommending it.
Yes, so try to be a happy person. Something else that came up from studies of centenarians was that, of course, there is a lot of genetics and biology, but another common trait among centenarians was that they're generally more positive people. And even if they experience adversity in life, they recover from it more easily. It doesn't make them as depressed as most of the population. So keeping this positive attitude perhaps is also very important for longevity.
It is. Where can people find out more about you, Vera, and your research?
So I guess I can send you my website. So I'm at the University of Rochester, Vera Gorbunova. That's probably the best way. Look up the website, publications.
Sure. I'll make sure to put that in the show note. So Vera, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing some of all of your knowledge from so many years of doing research. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure.